all, I would like to acknowledge that we're all meeting on Aboriginal land this evening. I'm sitting on the land of the Wongal and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and those amongst us this evening and throughout our days. I'd like to thank them for their continuing custodianship of the land and the waterways, and acknowledge that this is the longest and continuing culture on earth, and pay my respect to all Aboriginal people and thank them for their patience and resilience as we learn to walk together. This evening, I would like to first of all introduce myself. My name is Augusta Supple and I am on the board of the Women's Club Sydney. This evening we are joined by a very special guest, Stephanie McCallum, who is a beautiful pianist and who has joined us very generously this evening to talk a little bit about her life as an artist, and to talk a little bit about what interests her and what inspires her. As many of you know, I think that whenever lockdown sort of confronts us all, we turn for succor and salvation from artists. And I think what is really amazing is when we have an opportunity to see behind the curtain a little bit into how they think, what inspires them, what brings them into the practice that they have chosen to pursue. So this evening, of course, Stephanie is a world-renowned pianist, and I'm looking forward to having a bit of a conversation. We've already had a little chat, but welcome this evening, Stephanie, to this very special Meet the Artist session.
Thanks, Augusta.
Now, I've had, I don't know about you, but my weekend was, I don't know, a little bit on the sort of functional side, with the exception of the fact that I got to give myself a soundtrack of your music this weekend. So today, and even downstairs playing on my Spotify, some of your recordings, including Illegal Harmonies, which I think is a fantastic collection of works for 20th century piano, and also Perfume, the Exquisite Music of France. As I've already revealed to you, Stephanie, my French accent is absolutely rubbish, and I apologise in advance, but welcome your correction of my pronunciation. So what we're going to do this evening, I'm just going to ask you 6 sort of general questions. You're happy to answer them or not answer them. You can just ramble on if you want, or answer them quite succinctly. Completely up to you. And what we'll do is we'll have time for a couple of questions from our wonderful members and guests and audience this evening who have joined us for this very special Meet the Artist session. So first up, I'm wondering if you could take us into a little bit of a sort of context for you and your love of the piano. And I'm wondering if there was a particular defining moment or some moments that really sort of made you think, I really want to dedicate myself to this instrument or this work or the pursuit of being an artist.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing that with music, you start very, very young. If you don't start very, very young, it somehow doesn't quite work. You know, you have to lay down all these neural pathways from a very early age to develop at a high level. And so I was very fortunate that I started aged 4, and you know, I guess it becomes a defining part of your identity. You don't think of yourself without your instrument. And I was always very, you know, interested in music. I liked to sing. I had a guitar, I had a ukulele. But probably one of the defining moments was when I decided that I'd have a crack at going to the Conservatorium High School. And I went and auditioned for the sort of grand poobah teacher there at the time. His name was Alexander Spagensky. And he was a very interesting chap, and he took me on. I was quite surprised, so I
You
decided.
remember what you played for him?
Yeah, I played for him. I remember playing one of my own compositions too, which I don't think he liked very much. But yeah, I mean, I seem to be reasonably successful at my piano playing. And so I decided, yeah, I'll go to the Conservatorium High School. It looks like fun. And when I got there, of course, I also took up the oboe. And Sir, as he was called, my teacher, didn't hang around all that long. He was quite elderly, had a stroke, and unfortunately I had to switch teachers. But I was again very fortunate because I moved on to someone who became a very close family friend, Gordon Watson. And he was an incredibly inspiring person, just really intelligent, really widely read. He wasn't, I think sometimes with piano playing in particular, because the repertoire is so huge, you can get a little bit narrow, a little bit sort of sitting in a room by yourself. I never felt that with him. I always felt opened out. And yeah, so I wouldn't say even by then I still hadn't dedicated myself to music. I was still open to all sorts of things. But by the time I got to the end of high school, I think I realised I would do that for my tertiary work.
So you had an oboe there in your midst. You could have very easily become a world-class oboist. Why piano?
Well, it is a lot easier. I shouldn't really say this in front of oboists, but it's a lot easier to play the oboe than it is to play the piano. The repertoire is a lot smaller and it's very easy to read the music and so on. It's a lot less complex. Obviously, the sort of polishing level of the sound is exponential, infinite. So as I got sucked into the oboe world, I thought, nah, I don't want to be an oboist. I definitely want to stick on the piano. The repertoire is so much better. So I switched to the cello. So I also learned the cello as well. And all of that is really helpful, you know, because it refines your sense of colour in the sound and so on.
That's a beautiful observation. I'm just sort of thinking about at the time of you being a teenage person and really sort of involving yourself into conservatorium music, it would have been the music that would have been popular and around you at that stage would have been quite contrasting to some of the classical music you'd be diving into at that stage. So
yeah, to a certain extent, though, I must say, you know, the Conservatorium High School was full of nerds, musical nerds, classical musical nerds. So yeah, it was a marvelous place at that stage. Very, very small, very family-like. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. So in your current life, Stephanie, you're a teacher, you're an academic, and you're also a leading pianist, concert pianist. So is there something that's inextricably linked about those sort of three identities and practices as an artist? Can you imagine just being one of those things? Is it sort of something that you wish you could do more of? How is it that you can sort of strike a balance between that? Because you're a live, you do live performance as well as recording, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah, how do you balance all of these different sort of parts of musicianship and academia?
Yeah, it's very interesting. The three of them certainly bounce off each other and enhance each other. And I think there's very few soloists who don't do some teaching, you know, and even orchestral musicians, they tend to do a bit of teaching. I actually spent 7 or 8 years in England after I finished at the Conservatorium. And during that time, I was mainly pursuing solo performance and sort of building my capability and my repertoire and that sort of thing. But when I got back to Australia after that, it was a conscious decision to move back. I had a son who was by that stage about 7 or 8, and we wanted to bring him up here. And I realised in coming back to Australia that the whole idea of sort of pursuing a soloist career was really pretty impossible. It's very hard when you accept that you'll be doing a certain amount of teaching, you have a commitment to those students. It's very hard to take off on solo tours all the time. And Australia's a long way away, you know, so it's very hard to make that sort of thing work. So I guess sort of coming back from England, I threw myself into a wide range of activity, which linked me with lots of different areas, in particular the contemporary music scene and a lot more chamber music and stuff like that, but also recording, because recording was a way of continuing my solo playing without having to tour all the time or tour very far. And I found the recording a really interesting thing to develop, and quite different in a way to live performance. I did also, at the time, the ABC was very, very active with Australian artists then, and I did do a lot of live to air performance, which was really scary, but very fulfilling.
Have you, this is a bit of a sneaky question here, Stephanie, I'm just wondering, with some of those live performance moments where you're being recorded by ABC, were there some moments where you're there playing thinking, I'm not sure if I can get through this, or how do you manage your nerves in that sort of situation? Because it's kind of, in a way, quite high stakes.
Yeah, it is very high stakes, but I suppose it's the same when you're performing live in a concert. It's just the audience is bigger, a lot bigger, but you're not aware of them. I mean, you're aware of the studio audience. I was doing it to a studio audience, so it's very like a live performance. And people are, I was going to say very forgiving, but they also, you know, when you're listening to a live performance, you're hearing a communication. I mean, you yourself said you were in drama. I think it's very similar. If someone's doing a Shakespeare play and they substitute a word and everyone in the audience knows the speech, it doesn't wreck it. No one worries about it, you know. I think these little moments of humanity make live performance good.
I think so too. I'm a very big fan of live performance. I think there's something in the sort of transience of things. It's high stakes, but it's also the ephemeral nature of it sort of reminds us of basically that we'll all keep going, really. No one's actually just keeled over from playing a bum note or, you know, forgetting the rest of to be or not to be, which I think it's a good thing. So I guess you're known as many on the performance of Alkan. What drew you to his music, and how did you find him? Was this something that was sort of introduced to you by one of the sort of nerd circles there at the Conservatorium High School, or was this a later discovery? How does one find this kind of music, and what took you what took your heart when you encountered it? Or maybe it was your mind.
It's pretty much mind, I think. It's a very interesting story, this, because it sort of kicks off the whole idea of a kind of pedigree of teachers. And what happened was Gordon Watson, who I was studying with at the time, this is about halfway through high school or towards the end of high school, said to me, his old friend, Ronald Smith, was going to come out to Australia on a concert tour. And he was a crazy guy because he was interested in this really odd composer, Alkan. And Gordon himself had done a lot of, he'd lived in London for many, many years, and had done a lot of Alkan music there himself. So he had actually done some premieres. And the reason for this was because he had studied with a wonderful pianist called Alkan. And Alkan had studied and was a friend of a marvelous composer called Busoni. Now, I don't know if our audience will know about Busoni, but he was one of the first people to perform Alkan, and he really copped a lot of flack for it. You know, it wasn't popular.
Can you tell us why? Why wasn't
So Alkan is a very strange personality, and it is music. It's extremely individual and extremely complex, and in some respects, there are sides to his personality that can be quite bizarre, and it is a very it's a very interesting connection actually with myself, because the whole issue of mental illness in musicians, and also in people with these extremely highly developed brains that just do one thing really amazingly well, and often child prodigy type of person as well. My son was a little bit like that. Elena Katz, my other good composer friend, her son is a little bit like that. And Alkan, I'm convinced, was a little bit like that. I
really, really want you to spit it out, though, Stephanie. What are you? What
am I talking about?
Well, obsessive? Is that what you're sort of leaning into? A little bit too focused, or?
Well, Alkan was an extraordinary child prodigy, and by the time he was in his 20s, he was playing on the same concert platforms as Chopin and Liszt. They were good friends. He was actually a next door neighbor of Chopin for many years, and they were very close. But something happened in Alkan's 20s. His personality just had a complete change, and he became a recluse. He stopped performing, and he was just not heard of again for 7 or 8 years. And then very, very rarely performed in the rest of his life. But while he was doing all this, he was composing these absolutely enormous pieces of music, extremely complex, extremely original. And my theory is that he had a psychotic break. And, I think it is very, the way people with mental illness in that period were treated and how they were kept in the community and how they were looked after is very, very different to today. So when I say that, people look at me and say, oh, no, he couldn't possibly have, but I'm certain that's what must have happened. And very, very interesting to pick up what's going on through his letters and so on. So that's one of the reasons, I guess, why I find Alkan so interesting. He's such a unique figure, and so much of this music had not been performed, or very scarcely performed at all, some of it not at all. So I was actually able to do some premieres in London of music which was 150 years old, This is very, very appealing to explore unknown territory like that. And something which is, it sort of breaks ground in terms of technical complexity. So if you're sort of looking for something very challenging, it provides that.
It sounds like you're absolutely no stranger and not afraid at all to take on a huge challenge like that. That would be an astounding sort of thing to do, to sort of be the person that is handling music that no one has heard for maybe 100, 150 years. It's a huge undertaking. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's what I did, and I actually have recorded a large amount of it. When I got back to Australia, I started recording some of the big works for ABC Classics, and then at the bicentenary of Alkan's birth, yes, 2013. I got in touch with a London company to see if I could do a project of his chant, which was a huge body of work that hadn't been done. And I thought I was just, cold calling, so to speak. But the chap said, "Oh no, is that your Wigmore Hall recital where you did the premiere?" Something so it was actually fantastic. You get this sort of feedback coming back from past performances that you didn't know who was in the audience.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, sort of, it's interesting also to have that sort of longitudinal relationship with an audience as well. I guess I sort of want to jump forward just a little bit into some of the work that you've done in more recent times. I think you've been a founding member and artistic director of contemporary ensembles. It really occurred to me on the weekend while I was listening very closely to your music about the responsibility of holding the kind of music that you hold in both of your hands as you're playing a piano, and about you mentioned a little bit before as well about this sort of solitary act of being really focused on solo playing. So this question's really around ensembles and around contemporary ensembles in particular, and I was wondering about how your work with contemporary ensembles is very different, or how it's similar to your sort of personal solitary solo practice, and also what inspires you about ensembles, and how do you know how to put certain people together? Like, what's the sort of, are there certain elements in the people that you've worked with in ensembles that that you're drawn to in particular?
Well, the contemporary music ensembles that you're referring to were in the 90s. Again, shortly after I came back from England, there was an English group where the lead figure of that had resettled in Australia. He was actually head of the Heart Research Institute at Sydney University, and also a double bass player. And he just rang me up and said, "Oh, do you want to do this? Because, we want to look at sort of very recent music." And so he was the artistic director for that. And I just turned up, and I learned such a lot about playing together, about listening and fitting in, but also just about new repertoire. So it opened up a huge field of repertoire for me. And then after a while, I became involved with Roger Woodward's Sydney Spring Festivals, and they eventually kind of produced a group of young musicians that were interested in pursuing this sort of modernist repertoire. And there were three of us sort of jointly planning programs and so on. And again, it's a whole big learning curve, but the piano parts are just huge. And I used to find that, again, it's, I guess, that feeling of wanting to do something that would stretch you a little bit, and something new, something to keep learning.
Again, the challenge is there, I think. Yeah. To throw down a gauntlet for you, Stephanie. For sure. So in 2000, so moving forward from the 90s through to 2000, you gave the world premiere of Katz Chernon's Displaced Dancers with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra. It was a piano concerto written especially for you. So can you tell me a little bit about how that came about, how your relationship with Katz Chernon sort of started and developed, and just a little bit about that sort of relationship between composer and performer?
Yeah, well, Elena and I are very close, and we go back a long way. Actually, when she came out from Russia, I had done because I was at the Conservatorium High School, we had an accelerated progression thing. So I'd actually got, although Elena and I are the same age, I'd actually got through my course, and I was actually teaching oral in the undergrad course at the con, and she was in my class, but her ears are just the most amazing ears. So it was very, very challenging trying to teach her and other people in the same class. So she and I got on very well. She was studying piano with Gordon Watson again, so we had that connection as well. And then I left to go to England. So by the time I got back, it was a long period apart, but we connected again over our sons who had similar issues. And yeah, and also because my ensemble that I was dealing with, Sydney Alpha Ensemble, commissioned quite a number of works from her, which were fabulous works, and actually went into, you know, a world-class repertoire, you know, being played in Europe and the States. So yeah, she was a very important figure. And yeah, so one day we were talking about piano playing, and I said, oh, why don't you write a piano concerto? And she said, oh, I already wrote one, because she wrote one for herself when she went through the conservatorium, and she played it as her final exam. And she said, but that doesn't count. I'll write one for you, and it can be your concerto. And so we just went along to the ABC, and again, in those days, they were very supportive. And then the QSO decided that they would do it. So yeah, and it was a fascinating piece. It's half an hour long, and it's 12 movements. So I begin to wonder whether people are connecting me with this gigantic stuff. But it's a lovely piece, very humorous, very big orchestra with lots of funny percussion, and yeah, it's a good piece.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a lot of fun. And again, another gauntlet throw down from you, Stephanie, of like, go on, write me a piece then, off you go. Well, so here's the final question before I just send over to anyone that would like to ask a question. But one of your current projects, as we had a little taste of recently at the Women's Club, which launched our Women in Music series, is really a project with Erin Heliard on performing repertoire of unrecorded four-hands compositions on early instruments. Can you tell us a little about this work? I'm guessing, again, it's along the same themes of doing things that other people don't do, and extending and exploring some unknown terrain. But yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been working on with Erin recently?
Well, this is another lovely example of the cross-fertilisation of teaching and performance. I actually taught Erin I took him through his final honours recital. Even though he was doing it on harpsichord, there was a bit of a kerfuffle and a problem with teachers. And so I took him through it, and we became, well, we were soulmates musically, basically. And so, you know, to come back to work with Erin at this stage of his career and my career is just magic. And looking for something new again, I was looking at the evolution of the piano, and in particular the particular pianos that Alkan used to use, which were made by a Parisian company called Erard. And Erin was also very interested in that period of the piano, and he'd been doing some research into the Paris Conservatoire around that period. So we got very interested in this together, and then we decided we were going to play some duets of Alkan and other composers from the period. And we were looking for an Erard piano to play on together, and we couldn't find, well, we didn't have one available to us. And then we tracked down a marvelous man in Amsterdam who is a sort of piano whisperer for Erards. And it's an absolutely marvelous story. And he said, "Oh, I love Alkan, you must come and, do that." And he just did everything for us. We went over there, we recorded a disc on his lovely 3 different Erard pianos in his studio. And he was just magic. Anyway, years passed, we decided we wanted to do another one. And I'd found some very early chansons. Ernest Chausson's a wonderful, I don't know, many people would know his flute concertino or whatever, but he's a wonderful late romantic French composer. And I found 2 little sonatines that were never published from some of the first things that he wrote. And so I got hold of those from the Bibliothèque Nationale and transcribed them. And we decided that we would put these in a program with some Alkan and some other works by composers that I've been working on, like Guy Repertoire, who's also a very interesting French composer. Anyway, we got a lovely disc full of very rare French repertoire, some of which had never been recorded, well, most of which had never been recorded before. And the Erard piano that we did it on actually came from the man in Amsterdam. We have this wonderful art philanthropist, Judith Nielsen, who runs the Phoenix Central Park sort of little hall. And she was listening to me talk about a previous recording that I'd done, again in Amsterdam, another one I'd done in Amsterdam by Alexandre Boly. And I gave her the disc, and they were just very, very interested in the sound and this lovely old piano, which dates from 1853. And she said, "Let's have it." So she actually bought it and brought it out to the Phoenix Centre. And it was a real blessing for us because, of course, then COVID set in and we weren't able to travel to Amsterdam anymore, but we had this one here in Sydney. And so we were able to record on that piano at Phoenix. So we've done the disc and it's actually been manufactured. It's winging its way out to Sydney very slowly as we speak. COVID, but its release date is September 17th, so it'll be out in Europe then.
And when will it be out in Australia, Stephanie? So 17th of September.
Oh, well, it'll be it'll be on Spotify and things like that from then. Yeah, from late September. But the actual discs, I don't know when they'll arrive. Hopefully by then.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of our members really keen to keep their eye out for something that they can hold in their hands and keep close to them as well. It's been really wonderful chatting with you. We've actually run out of time, and I promised that we wouldn't go much past 6:30. What was so wonderful about talking with you this evening, Stephanie, and what I find really inspiring about you and your journey is a sense of fearlessness, I think, about going into uncharted territory and being brave enough to ask the question of, oh, can you write me a concerto? Or maybe we should go hunt down a very rare piano. And all of those other sorts of kind of archaeological Indiana Jones style adventures that you've had with your music. It's really been quite a pleasure to hear just a little bit about you and your practice. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you to everyone who's joined in for this very first inaugural Meet the Artist series. What a pleasure it's been to chat to you, and I look forward to another time when we get to hear you in public. So once again, so thank you, and thanks everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.